Hello everyone and welcome to this presentation about SignalR. So this presentation was originally created for a SwiNUG presentation at my company where I work, Store Republic in Gothenburg. SwiNUG is a Swedish .NET user group where we meet now and then and talk about new .NET technologies. So I am Filip Ekberg, I am a software engineer at Store Republic, and I am the author of C# Smorgasbord. If you have not heard of C# Smorgasbord, you can check out my blog because I have a 35% discount on the price. So go over to my blog and check out my book, C# Smorgasbord. So this presentation is going to be about SignalR. A SignalR is about pushing data to the clients and having a persistent connection with the client and the server. So the tagline for SignalR is pushing data has never been easier. So I don't know if you have tried SignalR before, but it's really handy and really easy to get started with. Prior to SignalR, it might have been quite difficult to do what you can actually do with SignalR. So we're going to get more into depth what that might be later on in this presentation. But first off, what is SignalR? SignalR is an async signaling library for .NET to help build real-time multi-user interactive web applications. So this means that we can create real-time applications where we can send and receive data from a server to a client simultaneously, and everything is just awesome. And what I think is most awesome about SignalR is that it allows you to adapt to the programming model that you are used to. Like, it's asynchronous, you can use the tasks and you can work with it just as any other asynchronous operations in .NET. So why would you use SignalR? SignalR is really easy to get started with, and it's used to push data to the clients, but it doesn't only focus on the browser. So many web frameworks out there might focus on getting data to and from a server when you're in the browser, but it doesn't really extend to desktop applications. But with SignalR, you can actually get clients for a lot of different platforms. So there's support for Silverlight in Windows Phone 7, 7.1, and 8, and there's support for WinRT, which might not be official, and there's also support for iOS and Android and some other platforms. So I heard that Damien and David, who are the authors of SignalR, that they are working on some library for microcontrollers or like .NET Arduinos. So the basic idea is that you're enabled to send or push rather data from a server to a client, and of course the client can push messages up to the server. So if you've read anything about SignalR before, you know that backwards compatibility has always been a priority. So if we look at WebSockets, which has support for older clients and older browsers, so this is really important for SignalR as well. So it builds on top of some very interesting things. So it falls back on older technologies to support all different devices. Like, one of the techniques that you can fall back on is long polling, which means that you open a connection with the server, and this connection is open until there's a response that is going to be sent back to the client, or when the response actually times out after a very long time. And as soon as there's a response back to the client, the connection is closed and a new connection is open to the server, which is the same for if the connection is closed or if the connection is actually terminated because it timed out. So as you can see here on this little diagram here, that the client can send a request, and then of course the server sends back some data or updates some data, and then you get a response. But then after that, the client actually doesn't send any more requests. You just see that the server updates some data and you get a response back. This is quite interesting. So there's a connection open with the server from the client, and you can always push back data to the client. And SignalR is very simple. It's really easy to get started with. There's a lot of examples on the web on how you can get started. This is going to be one of them. And another pretty cool thing is that it's open source. So it's open source like Web API and MVC, and you can actually browse around the code and learn how they did these things, and you can see how do they solve the different clients, like for Silverlight or Windows Phone or the JavaScript. And I mean, if you have some requests for SignalR that you think is missing in the library, you You can always fork it because there's a GitHub page where the source code is actually stored. So you can go to github.com/SignalR and you can browse around the code. And they actually accept pull requests which are of high quality. You need to conform with their coding standards, which might be hard. So if you want to get started, you can always install this via NuGet or actually get the code from GitHub. So in order to install this, you fire up the package manager and you do install package, and it lives in Microsoft.ASP.ASP.NET.SignalR and -pre. And if this actually installs the JavaScript and some of the .NET libraries and jQuery and all the other dependencies. But if you want to install this in a traditional .NET application, like a WinForms application or a console application, you like to actually install the SignalR client. So there's different clients, but this is the one to use when you want to install this in a .NET application. So SignalR is based on two different layers. So at the bottom, you have the persistent connection, and on top of that, you have the hubs. And you have some different use cases for these two layers. So the persistent connection is more of a way to work with it in a much rawer way. Like, think of this as sockets. So if you want to work with the data on a very low level, the persistent connection is what you are going to work with. And the hubs, on the other hand, is an abstraction on top of the persistent connection, which actually allows you to use some very nice abstractions, which make it very, very easy to get started with. Like, for example, if you want to, you can expose your hub. When you expose your hub classes, there are proxies automatically generated to JavaScript, which I'm going to show you later, which is pretty cool. So if you create a class that is a hub and you have some methods in this hub, you actually get this method exposed as JavaScript, which is awesome. So if you want to run SignalR in Windows 8, you have to do some magic, because Windows 8 doesn't allow linking external JavaScript. I'm of course talking about HTML5 and JavaScript Windows 8 applications. So I'm going to show you a little bit later how you get this started in Windows 8, because you need to use a proxy instead of actually including the .NET libraries or actually including the hub JavaScript. So let's head over and look at some demos. I'm gonna try to create a cross-platform game at the end of this presentation. So what I'm gonna do is that I am going to fire up Visual Studio here, and I am going to create a new empty web application called SignalR demo. And once this has been created, I am going to fire up the package manager console, and I am going to do install package Microsoft.ASP.NET.SignalR pre. And this is going to go to the NuGet server and fetch the latest SignalR version and install all these dependencies into my application. You can, of course, also go up and have a look at the package manager. Yeah, you can head over and have a look at the package manager GUI as well if you want to do that. So the next thing that I need to do here is I need to create something that is actually going to be my server. So I am actually going to call this server. And this is going to derive from the, let me just change the font size here a little bit. All right, that's better. So this is actually going to inherit from the persistent connection, which lives in Microsoft.ASP.NET.SignalR. And this will allow me to override a public method called unreceived async. And unreceived async returns a task, and it takes some different parameters here. One of them is the data. And when you inherit from persistent connection, you actually have a property here called connection, which is an interface connection. You can use this to actually broadcast data, broadcast to all the clients. So this actually takes a value that you can broadcast and an additional parameters. So I'm gonna take all the data that I received from the client, because this method is going to be invoked when this server receives some data, and this returns a task which is awaitable. So I can just return this. All right. So now I have a server here. So now I need to add another file here. I need to add some routing to this. I need to add a global application file here. So what I need to do here now is that I need to add this a route to this. So I need to do route table, and I need to add my system.web.routing, and then I need to add a route, and I need to map my connection. Map connection is actually something that lives in the SignalR namespace. So I'm going to add my server here, which is the generic parameter for this. I'm going to call this the echo server, and then it's going to actually accept some operations on this very nice route here. And I can add the using for Microsoft ASP.NET SignalR. All right. So next up, I need to add a client here so I can actually test this server out. So I need to add a new HTML file. I'm going to call this index. And what I'm going to do next now is that I'm going to add a JavaScript that actually sends and pulls data from the server, or rather it sends and receives data. So I'm going to add a script file here. That is called server.js. It doesn't have to be called server.js. I just like the name of that, so it's consistent with everything else here. And I'm going to add some JavaScripts here so that I get some references here. I can get a very nice IntelliSense. All right, so when the document is loaded, I want to open the connection to my server, which is going to look something like this. Whoops. So as you saw before in the global ASAX file, I actually defined that the route to my server is actually echo. So over here in the global ASAX, I mapped my server to this address. And this is what I'm going to connect to. And this connection here is actually lives inside the jQuery.SignalR. And now I can define what happens when the connection receives data. This takes a function, and the function here actually gets some data sent to it. So when data is received, I get a function call, and the data is passed to that. All right, so now I need to put this data somewhere. So I'm going to expect that I have an element with the ID of data, and I'm going to append this the data that I got here, and I'm going to add a line break to this like that. And as soon as the connection is done, which looks like this. So here I am, I'm starting my connection. And when this is done, I'm going to listen for something called send. So what I'm going to do here is that I'm going to have a button, and I'm going to have an input field. So when I press the button and I have some text in my input field, I am going to send this back to the client. All right. So I want to map this after I've done the connection.start like that. And I can actually do connection.send and some type of message. And this message identifier actually points to an input field that I'm going to add later. So basically what happens here is now that we have a connection. We define what's going to happen when data is received on this connection. Then we actually open the connection and we wait for the connection to be done. And then we actually say what happens when we press the send button here. So now I'm gonna go over to my index page here. I'm going to add the references that I need. I need SignalR, I need jQuery, and I need my div called data, where I'm gonna put the data. I need an input field with the ID of message. And I need an input button, input type button, which is actually going to just let me send some data. Okay, so let's see if this actually runs and compiles here. It does. It brings up Google Chrome here. Let's see what, if we just inspect this to see if there's any errors. There's no errors, and you see a message there. Do you know what's going to happen if I open another tab here? Hello there. Actually shows it here, right in the other browser. Isn't that cool? So what actually happens here now is that when I press this button, we can bring up the inspector here and check what happens to the network. If we refresh both of these. You can actually see that the connection actually called echo with the following data. You can actually inspect the headers and the query string and everything like that. We can actually see the message here. All right, so this is very cool. This is very low level. And what is even more cool is that I can actually add a new project here. I can go over and add a console application called My Client. And as I stated before, you can actually install SignalR into .NET applications like this. So instead of doing the -pre on just SignalR, I do install package Microsoft ASP.NET SignalR client. And I'm going to select my client and I'm going to install this package. Whoops, sorry, I need to have the pre here. All right, so the client is installed into my console application here. So what I can do now is I can do using Microsoft ASP.NET SignalR, and I can open a connection. I can open a connection here, connection. Actually, I need to bring in SignalR.client. And then I need to point to a place where this connection is actually going to connect. And I have some different parameters there that I can use. But I'm going to connect to my local host where I'm hosting my SignalR server. And then I'm going to do almost exactly as I did in the JavaScript. I'm going to say that when something is received, I am actually going to create an event handler for this. And I'm just going to write out the data. Oops. Which is actually what I'm going to call this to make it a bit more clear. So I have my connection. And when the connection receives some data, I'm actually invoking this event handler just as I did in the JavaScript. And then I can do connection start.wait. And as you can see, this is pretty similar to the JavaScript version. It's awesome that it's so tight together. All right, so now I'm going to actually allow the console to send some data. So as long as the input is not, so as long as there's something to read from my console, I'm actually going to do connection.send input. All right, so what happens here is that as long as there is something to read from the console. I'm going to send this to the server. So if we bring up both of these windows again, like so, as you can see, I can still send some data here, and it's displayed in both of these clients here. And what I can do now is that I can open up a, whoops. Oh, it didn't find the server for some reason. So that's because I need to add the echo here to actually point to where the server is, because my client here doesn't really know where this is stored. Just as I did in the script that I wrote here, it connects to the local host where this is hosted, and that just adds echo to that. So now when I start this, I'm going to see an empty console here. I can type something, and you can see that this actually works. This is broadcasted to all the clients. All right, so this has been awesome, but let's take this to the next level. So let's take a look at what the hubs can do. The hubs can actually do for us. So I'm going to go into my SignalR demo here again. I'm actually going to create a new project. I'm going to create an empty web application. I'm actually going to call this Tic-Tac-Toe. All right, so for those that doesn't know what Tic-Tac-Toe is, it's a game that you need to get 3 markers in a row. So I can bring up MS Paint here, and Tic-Tac-Toe usually looks something like this here. So you have some of these squares here. I'm not the best graphical designer, as you can see. So let's say that this is Tic-Tac-Toe, then I have my square that I can put wherever I want. I have my X that I can put somewhere, and the goal is to get 3 in a row here, all right? Pretty easy. So let's try to do this like a multiplayer game where you can actually connect to the browser and play with a friend. And what I'm going to do here first is that I am actually going to add a new class called Game. And in this game, I'm going to derive from the hub class, which is actually in the SignalR library that I need to install first. So I'm going to install the SignalR package into my application here, and then I'm going to bring in the hubs namespace here. All right. And what hubs actually allows me to do is that if I were to write a method in here, like for instance, public void register client string data, this would actually be a method exposed in my hub JavaScript. All right, so if I fire this up here, I can actually go to /SignalR/hubs, and I can actually see that it added something down here. It added a hub proxy called game, which corresponds to the actual name of my class, and it actually added a method called register client. This means that I can actually invoke register client. It actually lowercase the first letter here because it should correspond with JavaScript, with the JavaScript style of coding. So I can actually use my JavaScript to directly invoke this if I include this JavaScript. And the JavaScript for hubs is always in /SignalR/hubs. All right, so what I'm going to do here now, I'm actually going to have a couple of methods here. So I'm going to allow for a client to register. I'm going to allow for a player to look for a game if the player is actually registered. And I'm going to include some JavaScript, some CSS and JavaScript that I have pre-written to make this all much smoother. So what I want to do here in my find client or register client method, I want to actually check if there's already a client in my case, a public static list of clients. So I'm actually going to, first of all, I'm going to create a public class called client, which is actually going to have some properties that I know is common for all my clients. So I'm going to have a public string name the name of the client. Now I'm going to have a opponent to this actual client. So there's actually going to be a reference here, opponent. And I'm going to have a couple of booleans to tell me if the game is actually being played by this client. So public bool is playing. Actually going to just copy and paste all this. Bool. If you didn't know about this feature, that I can actually hold down Alt and actually mark and just write it like that. It's awesome. So it's playing, and we have waiting for a move. So if the client is waiting for a move or is playing, these two should be true or false. And then I actually want a property called looking for opponents, which is going to be set when the player has registered and actually requested to start a game. And then I'm going to add something to actually identify which client is which. So I'm going to have a public string connection ID. If I can just spell string correctly here, which seems impossible. So get set on this, and the connection ID. The connection ID here is actually something that I can receive from SignalR. So when a client sends a request or a message to the hub, I actually get a connection ID with this request. It's the same with the persistent connection. So what I'm going to do here, first of all, I am going to add a public static list of clients called clients, like that. And because this is actually going to be a multiplayer game, I'm actually going to add a sync route to this because I want this to be thread safe. So I'm going to do a public object, actually private sync route new object, like that. And as soon as a client is going to register, I am actually going to lock down all the list for the client so that I am actually the only one working with this, like that. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to look through my clients list here, and then if there's a client or not a client, I'm going to add the client, or I'm actually going to set this player as is playing false. So I have actually pre-written some of these code here. So I'm gonna go through it here. So I'm creating a new client. I'm actually asking the list, which I have up here, for a client with the corresponding connection ID. If there's no client like that, I'm actually adding the client to the list, and I'm adding it with a name here. And I'm setting the property is playing to false. And when this is done, I am actually going to send a message back to the client. And I can do this by actually doing clients.client. And I can specify a connection ID here if I want to send this message to one of the actual clients, or I can actually do a clients.all or client.all except. All right, so what I can actually do here is that I can broadcast to two different client sets. I can actually broadcast to all, I can broadcast to all except, and actually just tell it to broadcast to all clients except my connection ID. And I can actually do clients.clients, which is the client, the dynamic object of the client. So I can do clients.clients, which is a dynamic object, which lets me do invocation on different methods here. So I can pass a connection ID, which is actually the current context's connected ID, and I can do an invocation on a method here. So as soon as a client has registered to play this game, I can actually call a method that I expect the client to have called register complete. So what this will actually do is that it will be possible to subscribe for a method called register complete in the JavaScript. So let's see if we can get this working with just this small amount of data here. As you notice that I don't need to add a global ASX file here because this is automatically added when using the hubs. So I can add my index HTML file here. And in the index.html, I'd like to add my JavaScript for the hubs, and I'd like to add the JavaScript for jQuery and SignalR. Right, so I'll add these in here, and oops, that's the wrong one. I'll add jQuery, I'll add SignalR, and I actually also need to include the hubs. So I do SignalR slash hubs, type is equal to text JavaScript. Sorry about that. All right, so now I'm all set up here, so I can start actually adding some JavaScript here. So let's actually add some script tag down here, where I will actually add all my script code that would probably be best off added to a separate script file for performance reasons and for So once the document is loaded, I will actually call this function here, which is going to set up the connection just as we saw before. So as you saw in this this file here, the hubs file, I actually have a proxy called game here, and game has a client and a server. So I can do almost the same as we did before with the connection, but this time I can actually add the extension. I can actually use the object game here, which was added to my connection object, and then I can actually say that on my game object on the client side, I expect a method called register complete to be called. This actually takes a function. This is actually a function that takes a parameter message like so. So I can actually do alert message like that. And once we actually send a register request to the server, I can actually get this callback here. All right. So what I want to do now is I want to add a button called register. Actually, I'm going to add some code that I've already written here. So I'm going to add a header to this here, and then I'm going to add a div, which actually will just be a placeholder for all the game information, and I'll add a section for registering here. So I have a button called register name, which has the value of register to play tic-tac-toe. So once I actually press this button here, once I actually press the register name button here, I'll have a callback function here, which will be used, an event handler. So I'll have this event handler here, and in this event handler, I will actually call the game server and invoke the register client method, and I will pass the name of the current player, which is actually going to be game name, not gamma name, like that. And I'm going to take the value. All right, so let's run this and see what happens here. Let's actually add a breakpoint in here. So now I'm going to debug this here. And hopefully there will be a nice input field here. I'll add my name here. I'll press the play register to play tic-tac-toe. And nothing happened because... right. So I actually need to start the client here first before I can actually do anything with it. So I need to call connection.hub start like that to start the hub that I currently work with. So I can do like that, and this will bring me into the code here. So you can see that the data is actually Filip, so it's sent in the correct data. So it's actually going to lock the sync route here, and then we're going to go down and see here that there is no client. It's null. Whoops. See an error here. So it's actually needs to be client here, like that. Sorry about that. Now if we send this in here, it should actually add the client to the list of clients, which means that clients should now have one client called Filip with this connection ID. And then it's going to call the register complete callback here. And since we did not pass any data in here, it's actually going to say undefined here because we just alerted the actual message sent back from the server. So I can actually remove that. And when the registration is complete, I want to remove the register div like that, and I want to show another div. So the next div that I want to show here is actually the one that would allow me to find an opponent. So I've already written the HTML for this. It's going to look like this. So we have find opponent, and it's going to set find someone to play the game with, and just a small way from beating your first opponent. So it's a button here. It's called find game, and the value is find opponents. So in order for me not to actually see these from start, I'm actually going to look for this element called find opponent. And I'm going to hide this from start, and then once we've actually registered, I'm going to show it. And I'm going to press this button here, find game. I am actually going to call the server and try to find a game. All right, so we need to add another click handler here for the find game ID, because I have the find game ID here on the button. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the game server, and I'm going to invoke the method called find opponent, like so. All right, and when this is actually showing, when we press this here, I actually want to hide both of these, and I want to show another div here called waiting for opponents. So I've written this as well. It looked like that. It just shows some text that says that we are actually looking for a opponent right now. So I'm going to show this. Whoops, like this. And it's called waiting for opponents, and I'm going to hide this from start and show it down here. All right. Okay, so now I need to actually create the logic for what happens when I call the method find opponent. So we need to have a function in here called public void find opponent. Doesn't need to take any parameters because we have the connection ID. I can actually look up the client in here, and in this find opponent, function is actually going to be quite lengthy. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to actually look inside my clients collection for someone with the connection ID that we are currently on. If there's not a if this player does not exist, we need to return, because then there's something wrong. They need to refresh the page or something like that. And if there actually is a player, we need to set the looking for opponent to true, because now these players actually looking for someone to play with. And then we're going to check if there's actually, if there are any opponents currently looking for a player. So imagine that we first have one player that registers and presses the find opponent. Then it's actually going to set this variable to true on that. And then when someone else connects and actually registers and looks for an opponent, we want to grab both of these and connect these. So here I have a expression that actually says find someone in the client's list where the connection ID is not equal to my connection ID, and where the player is actually looking for an opponent and not currently playing. So this is going to give me a long list of players. Hopefully there's a lot of people playing this game. So I'm actually going to order this randomly, and then I'm going to grab the first one that I can find in this list. So if there's currently not an opponent, we need to tell these clients that there's actually no one looking for a game right now. So I'm going to do context.connection ID, context.connection ID. I could also use the player.connection ID, and I'm going to invoke a method called no opponents. I'm going to return from this context. So what happens now is that it's going to call a method back on the client, which will pushes back this message to the client and tells it that there is no one looking for a game right now. So if you go back to the client here and actually just hook this up, it's going to be game.client.noOpponent. It's equal to new function. It's going to be the function that I am going to use when this method is invoked. And this is actually going to just display yet another div here, because we want to inform the player that there's currently no one looking for a game. So what I have here is I have an information div that I'm going to just spit in random information in. So we need to add this as well. All right, so let's see if we can add this here. Let's call it game information instead, and actually add this to the top of the page like that. So when there's no opponent, we're just going to show this HTML looking for an opponent. All right. But if we actually did find an opponent, I want to match these two together. So I am going to tell the system that the player is actually playing right now, and the opponent is actually also playing right now. And neither of them is actually looking for a new opponent. So player.is looking for is equal to false. Opponent.looking for is equal to false. The naming of these two could of course be much better to conform with the naming standards. So they should be actually be is looking for opponent. And then I'm going to do a circular reference here. So I'm going to do player.opponent is equal to opponent, and then opponent equal to player, like that. And then I'm going to notify both of these clients that there's actually an opponent found, and I have some code ready here to do that. So I'm going to do clients.client and send this to the current connection ID and tell it that I found an opponent with this name. And then I'm going to tell the other client with opponent connection ID. With the opponent connection ID, I'm going to tell it that I found an opponent with the player name, like that. So let's head over and implement the found opponent function and just see if this actually works. So we have game.client. What was the method called? Found opponent. Whoops. Found opponent is equal to a function which actually takes a message, or like that. All right. And when we found an opponent, I want to add some information to all this and actually do some some things here. So we have the found opponent method here that is actually going to hide the waiting for opponent hide, and it's actually going to set the game information to something else. We're going to inform the player that we are currently playing against someone here, and then I'm actually going to add a div up here called game, which is actually going to be the game field. So we have a div ID called game, like so. And this is actually something that I want to hide from the start. So we have game here, I'm going to hide it. And once we actually found an opponent, I am going to show this. So I'm going to show the game. But currently there's nowhere to place markers or such. So the problem here is that we actually need to add these nice boxes that I drew before. So I've written some JavaScript that just appends some spans to this div. It actually just adds some spans with an ID that is a number. So it's between 0 and 8, and then it's called the class is box. So I'm going to style this a little bit later so it looks better. All right. So now I have something that actually works here. So let me just add some style here so that we can actually see if these boxes are styled correctly. So let me add a new item, style sheet called site.css. So the site.css will actually fix all our nice styling for this game. So the one thing that I want to work with now is actually just this span. It's going to be a pink border. It's going to be no background at all at this moment. It's going to be displaying block like a block, and it's going to be 80 by 80 pixels, and it's going to float to the left. So if we were just to start this up here, actually I'm going to start debugging this. I'm going to go into the client here, put a breakpoint there, just to see that we actually have something that will work here. So I'm going to register myself to play tic-tac-toe. So you can see it actually registered me here. I'm going to press find opponent, and you're going to see that that works as well. Currently there's actually 2 opponents in the list here because no, actually it's not, because as you noticed, I actually added myself here before to the clients list, but as I restarted the web server locally, the cache actually timed out. So it's going to add this message to the client that there's currently no opponent. So it's going to tell me that it's searching for an opponent. So I'm actually going to open a separate window here. Call this one Sophie. As you can see, it actually went into the register again. Press find opponent. It is going to hopefully work now. Yes, it did. So there's an opponent called Filip. So Sophie found a player called Filip. It's going to match these 2 together. It's going to add a notification to both of these clients. And if we try to inspect here, let's see if there's actually something called game showing here. So let's see if there's actually a lot of spans over here. So I didn't actually include the CSS yet, but as you can see, this actually worked. So I'll do this right away so I don't forget it later. I've added the CSS to the file here. And what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to actually decide who's going to start this game. So to do that, I'm going to do a fair dice roll, which means that I need to use some random number here. So I'm going to do a new private random object called random, Then down here, I am actually going to pick a number between 0 and 5,000 and see if that's divisible by 2. And then I'm going to say that the player is waiting for move, false. This means that the player looking for the game is actually going to be the first one putting down their marker. And for that one, I'm going to set false. And then I'm going to send 2 messages, one to each of these clients. I'm going to tell them that we're waiting for a marker, waiting for marker placement, or waiting for the opponent. So when I invoke waiting for marker placement, the actual player, the player which turns it is, will actually get the message telling them to place a marker, and the other player will just be waiting for the opponent to place his or her marker. And if the number that I actually dice roll here actually didn't select the first player, I'm going to do the reverse and just send the message to the clients as well. And then I want to be able to keep track of all my games. So up here with the public list of clients, I'm going to add a public list of something else, which actually keeps track of my game here. So I have written a class that actually can find if someone is winning or not. This class is called tic-tac-toe. I'm going to move this to another file here and talk a little bit about what is in this file here. So the class is called tic-tac-toe, which is the game name here. It's going to keep track of if the game is over or if it's a draw. Its draw will never be true if the game is not over. And it's going to keep track of the player 1 and player 2. It's going to have a game field with 9 positions in it. And it's going to say how many moves are left. Moves are left is currently not used. So the first thing that happens when you create a tic-tac-toe game is that it's going to reset the game field. It's going to set all the positions in the array of integers to -1, which means that there is room for marker placement. Then we have the play method here, which takes a player and a position. The integer of the player is actually the marker definition, so it can be either 0 or 1, which means if that the position in the array will actually be 0 or 1, which indicates if it's player 0 or player 1 or 2 actually. So what it's going to do is it's going to check if the game is over, then it will return false. If not, it's going to place the marker, which actually means that it's going to check how many moves are left. See that I actually see that this is used here. So it's going to check if if there are actually moves left to make. If there's not and there's no winner, the game is over and there's a draw. If not, we check if the position is actually larger than the field length. The field is the game board, and then we return false. And if the actual position that I want to place the marker on is equal to -1, is not equal to -1, that means that someone has already placed a marker, and I will return false. If not, I'm going to set this position to the player number and return true, because then we will actually check for the winner. So inside the winner method here, I'm going to check if there's a winner in this game. So you don't need to know all this math here that I'm doing, but basically I'm checking the first thing that I'm doing is I'm checking one direction and this direction. So let's say that we have the game field that I talked about before, which looks like somewhat like this here. So in the first iteration, I will actually call and see if this line is all the same, and look at this line. If it's not, I'm actually going to check this line next time, and this time, then this one, and this one, and finally I will check if these corners are have a winner. So this is what this math does, and if there's a winner, this method will return true, which will actually go back to the game here and return true to the clients to know that as we have a winner. So as I said before, I want to keep track of all the games. So I'm going to do a public static list of tic-tac-toe games called games. And down here in the method for find opponents, I'm actually going to add this to the games list. So I'm going to lock on the sync root here just to make this thread safe, and I'm going to add this to the games list. I'm going to add a new tic-tac-toe game where the player 1 is player and player 2 is opponent, and that's it. Now we actually have a game. So now we are actually just waiting for someone to press these buttons here. So I'm gonna start off to here and just see if we can find an opponent. You see we have actually 9 boxes here. I can't do anything on them now, but they are all there. There's some styling missing here, of course, that we're going to add later on. So what I want to do now is that once I actually press in one of these boxes here, I want to make a call back to the server and actually play this marker. So I'm actually going to add a live event handler here because I add this in runtime, so I need to have a live event handler here for the click event, and this is my function that I'm going to use as an event handler. And I'm actually adding marker class when I have marked a box, so that if this class is actually added, I can't even send this to the server. And then I'm going to call the server method play and send the event target ID, which is actually the box ID. So let's go back into the game class again and actually add this method called play. So we have public void play int, right? This takes an integer. And it's called position. All right. So the first thing that I want to do here is that I want to check if the player 1 or player 2's connection ID is actually the connection ID that is connected. So what I do here is that I check the games collection and I take the first game that actually has a player 1 or player 2 with the corresponding connection ID, and I check if the game is null or if the game is actually over. If it is, I return. Then I need to define the marker for the current player to know if there should be an X or a 0. I do this by actually just checking who the player number 2 is. So player number 2 will actually always be X. So what I do here, I check if the connection ID is the same as mine. If it isn't, I set it to 0, right? And if the current player is actually waiting for a move by the opponent, I'm actually going to return because then it's not my turn to play. And then I'm going to notify both the clients that there is actually a hand placed. And to do this, I'm actually going to use another helper class up here just to make it a little bit easier. I could send a dynamic object, but I'm creating something called game information that has the opponent name, winner, and marker position. And in this case here, I will actually just use some of these properties on this object. So I'm going to notify both of the players that there was a marker placed by the opponent name at that position. So the current player, the name of the current player played something at this position, and I'm going to call add marker placement like so. I'm going to send this to both player 1 and player 2. So I can actually go back to the index file again and actually implement this method here. So it's going to be game client marker, add marker placement. It's going to take an object here that is actually going to be, let's call it message to be concise, like that. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to check who the player is. So I have some code written for this already. Looks like this. So if the message.opponent name, this actually corresponds with the object's name. So it actually serializes the object very nicely, and it works to just call all the properties here on this object. So it checks if the message.opponent name. So if the opponent name is the same as my game name, then the marker is actually going to be some marker. If it's not, it's going to be another marker. All right. And then I know if it's my turn or if it's the opponent's turn. So I'm just going to change the information to game information here instead to add it all in the same place. All right. So let's see if I can actually add the style for the markers and actually add the images here. So I'm going to add a folder called content, and then I'm going to have my images in here, add folder called images, and then I'm just going to add a game logo and an X and an O. And then I'm actually going to take a very nice CSS here and just paste it in. I added some box shadows. I added some of these X's and O's here. And just to make sure that they are loaded, I'm actually going to preload the resources with JavaScript so that works. It looks nice. All right, so let's actually run this and see what happens. As you can see here, it actually looks a lot nicer. So Filip, Sophie, play tic-tac-toe, find an opponent. You're up against Filip. I have no idea whose turn it is. This you're up on both of the ends, so something is clearly not right. Okay, so something's wrong here. So the problem was actually that I had gamma name instead of game name here, so there was a misspelling there. Let's run this again and see if this works better. Test 2. All right. So we actually have, I can't see whose turn it is. It's literally the same person's turn all the time. That's probably because I don't swap whose turn it is here in the play method. So as you can see, I can actually do the placement here, and we need to add some information here. Let's see. So once we've actually notified the players that there's a game in place and that there's a marker being placed, sorry, I'm actually going to add the marker. I'm actually going to play the marker in the I'm actually going to place the marker, sorry. I'm going to place the marker on the current position. And if the play method returns true, that means the game is over and we need to notify the players that the game is over. Let's get back to this later. So if the game is over, I'm going to notify both of the clients. And if there's a draw, I'm actually going to tell the clients that it was a draw, like this. So this is going to notify both players that the game is over and that there was a draw. But if the game is not over, I'm going to notify the clients that there's a change in who's doing the next placement. So I'm going to notify the player that whose turn it is, tell that player that we're waiting for a marker placement, and then I'm going to say that I'm waiting for a move and not waiting for a move. I'm going to invert those. This means that we would probably be able to actually run this now. like this, F, S, find opponent, find, and it doesn't say whose turn it is. I can't press here because it's not my turn. I can put my marker down there, and as you can see, the player sees their own placement as an X, like that. And I can actually, since it's my turn here, I can actually do it like this, and actually notify that the game is over. As you can see, I can't place a marker on any of these clients. So this is the next method that I would actually need to listen for. I need to listen for the game over message, and I need to listen for some other messages as well. So I can actually go back into my JavaScript here, and I can add a new message that I'm waiting for. So it's actually a game client. When it's game over, I'm going to add game information and say that you're playing against this person here. Actually, I'm going to add information and do append here. So I'm going to say that the game is over. We have a winner. The winner is whoever was sent in the message. So this is actually not, hold on here. I need to move around a bit here. So it's actually going to say game over. And I don't have this debugging here. And then I'm going to show another button here that tells me if there's, that we can actually search for a new game if we want to do that. And this box here actually looks pretty similar to the first one. It's simply just another button here. So it says find a new opponent. The reason that I need to add this again here is that I want it to be added below the game plan. So let's just do it like that. All right. All right, so what this actually could be looking like when it's actually done. So if I'm just gonna add some other code that I have already written before, which will make the game look a little bit nicer. Let's go through it here. So as you can see, I have a register placeholder, I have a find opponent, I have waiting for opponent, I have game, and I have find another game. Then I have my connection to the game hub. I have waiting for opponent, I have waiting for marker placement, I have found opponent, I have no opponents, add marker placement, and I have opponent disconnected, so that when the opponent actually disconnects, the client actually get a response back. Then I have register complete, as we saw before, game over, and then I have something called refresh amount of players, which will actually just update a panel where it says how many players that are currently playing the game. And then I'm listening for the click on a box, and then I can register, and I can find a game and some more things like that. So, and then I'm actually sitting here, as you can see, I'm setting long polling because I am actually using this in Azure. And in Azure, there's some bugs right now, which is hopefully going to be fixed soon. So you need to use long polling if you're on Azure. So if I just go back into the game here, and I actually copy and paste the finished code that I have from before. Sorry about that. Let's see. That's better. Sorry about that. So now I have actually added. So find opponent looks exactly like it looked like before. We have the play, which actually looks exactly like it did before. The new things here are send status stats update, which will actually just count the games played and count the amount of clients connected. And then I have a method called onConnect, which is actually something that I override from the hub, which will return a task, and it actually sends status update directly when you connect to the server. And then we have onDisconnect, which will actually check if the player that disconnected exists in the collection of games. And if so, we need to send an update to that client. We need to send a message to the client and tell the gamer that the game is actually ended. So let's start 2 instances of this. I need to add the style sheet here. which is actually in like that. All right. So let's see what happens if we do it this way, this way. I'm just going to refresh this here. So I'm Filip here. As you can see, this updated directly, and it's updated here as well. And I can do Filip 2. And if I match this player with the other player, it says that Filip is actually playing against Filip 2. And it's my turn over here. Now it's my turn over here. Now it's my turn over here, here, and here. And we have a winner. I can't do any more marker placements. Let's find opponent. And as soon as this also finds an opponent, we can actually match these two together. All right. All right, so that was the web client. So if I want to actually do this in a WinRT application as well, you could actually imagine that you just copy and paste all the HTML, but it's a little bit more complicated than that. I have actually created a WinRT application already that I am going to show you how that works. All right, so I am actually going to add my SignalR client in here. So I'm adding this project. Let's see if it compiles. It does. Let's set this as a startup project. And let's take a look in the there's actually a folder missing here. The pages folder, JS folder, images, and CSS, all missing. All right, so let's rebuild this. It seems like it builds. So let's take a look in the game. The CSS is identical, so it doesn't. There's some things added to fix the the specific Windows 8 look and feel, but in the HTML file, as you can see here, there's some new placeholders added. There's a header, which does just make it look exactly like it should. But everything in here, in the item concept, is actually just copy and pasted from the actual client that I'm using on the web. And then we have the JavaScript down here, which is actually almost identical except for this part here. So let's bring this up together next to the index.html here. So let's look at the wait for opponent part. So two things here. So the most interesting part is here that I'm just including the SignalR library here. And here I'm actually including SignalR plus the hubs, but I can't include the hubs in the Windows 8 application because Windows 8 doesn't allow for external libraries to be included. So what I need to do here is that I need to create a proxy to the server, create a hub connection, and actually connect to that place. And I have already published this to Azure, so I'm actually going to connect to the Azure here. So Azure, I could just as well just replace this to use my locally running version as well. And then as you can see here, I'm just creating the proxy for the hub. And then instead of using game.client.waitForOpponent, I'm actually doing game on the message waitForOpponent around this function. And that's pretty much what everything down here looks like. So there's minor changes to how you work with this in WinRT. So if I were to start this up like this, started, and here I am again, I can see the input screen here. So let's write my name, Filip. Just to play tic-tac-toe, find an opponent. So I'm actually currently looking for one opponent. So if I go to the tic-tac-toe 2012.azurewebsite.net, I can see that there's one player connected, and I'm going to say Filip 2 here, and it's going to say that I'm actually playing against Filip. I'm going to do my marker placement. I'm going to go back into this to the server. So I've done my marker placement here. I'm going to go back into my version here. I'm going to do a marker placement and see if that is actually working quite well. As you can see here, I can swap between these. I can actually win the game, and it notified me that I won in the Windows 8 application. So as you can see, it's quite easy to get this started with. It's easy to get it working very well in both the web browser and the Windows 8 version, because the code is quite similar to each other, and I really enjoyed doing this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at mail@filip@ekberg.se. And I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and you can ping me on Twitter, you can visit my blog, and don't forget to purchase a copy of C# Smorgasbord. Thank you very much.